Hey, Gary, what
Yes,
do you
sir.
do to improve your jiu-jitsu off the mat?
I like to review. And the way I do that is if I go to a seminar, usually 50% of it falls out of my head and I can't remember anything. So I like to go back and review those seminars at a later date.
Yeah, I wish there was a easy way to retain some of that information, whether we are in a class or a seminar, particularly seminar when they are longer and more complex. There's more layers as the instructors are showing techniques. I wish there was a way so we can go back and review all the details. Is there?
Yeah, I think there is. And the way I do it is Roll TV. Tons of stuff to review, and it's really a great platform for anything you need.
We've built this platform for over 2 years now, over 500 videos, anywhere between techniques, expert lessons, and we have huge guests like Christian Woodman C and Sophia McDormand and many others. And then also all the live events recorded at the Academy are fully available on Roll TV. So if you're looking to improve your jiu-jitsu or you're looking to review things from the class or seminar, Roll TV is a perfect platform for you to gain access to. Go to rollacademy.tv, create your account, gain the access, and continue your jiu-jitsu journey.
Yeah, check it out. It works wonders. You can't build anything without a strong foundation and a deep understanding of the fundamentals. On this episode of Roll Radio, Henry Akins shares his knowledge, developed over 25 years of jiu-jitsu training, on the topics of self-defense, how to train smart, the importance of positional training, and how putting yourself in bad positions will help you truly develop a well-rounded jiu-jitsu game. Here's Roll Radio with Rickson Gracie Black Belt and practitioner of Hidden Jiu Jitsu, Henry Akins.
Welcome to ROL Radio.
Hey, we're live. Gary, how are you, sir?
I'm great as always,
As
and I
always.
think as always, and I think you know where we're going with this right now. Go to therollradio.com and take a little survey there. Drop us your email, and you will automatically be entered into a free giveaway, gi giveaway that is. And we've had a couple winners so far. It's a gi of your choice, so already know they have amazing products. Therollradio.com. Take that survey, and who knows, at the end of one of the episodes, we might mention your name, your email address, and hit us up in 72 hours, and you got yourself a free gi.
Yeah, you can't beat that. You can't
Nope.
beat that. Let's get to the show. Henry Akins in the show and in the house. Henry, how are you? It's good to
Hey, I'm
see you.
great. Thanks for having me here,
Good
guys.
to see you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to have this conversation because we really want to focus on fundamentals of jujitsu, and it's such a um often not talked about topic, but also somewhat even controversial, right? I mean, jujitsu in the past 20 years has changed drastically. Drastically. What do you recall that one of some of the biggest changes that you've noticed as you've been in the industry, teaching, running academies, doing seminars? That's a big part of your presence out there.
hmm
What do you feel like the biggest changes have occurred in the past 20 or even plus years? I mean, you've been on the matter way past that.
Yeah. I think just the transition to a more sporting aspect, basically training jujitsu, which is dictated by like IBJJF rules or whatever, nowadays, I mean, even recently you see a huge transition into leg attacks, where before there was a long period of time where leg attacks were frowned upon. So it's a constant evolution, right? Um, but I definitely think, when I started, uh, the focus was mostly fighting, and it was, using strikes, how to fight, how to deal with guys from other martial arts, how to use jujitsu to defend yourself or to be able to overcome guys practicing from other styles. Which, you guys, everyone saw the first few UFCs.
Hmm.
You saw that was kind of the emphasis is what is the best martial art. And so
Mhm.
and then it evolved to basically jujitsu versus jujitsu, and then jujitsu versus jujitsu in the context of training on mats, and then the point system and stuff like that. So it's definitely kind of transitioned to kind of the rule set in which it's mostly practice now, right?
Do you think there's a benefit, or it's hurting jiu-jitsu in the long run?
I guess it depends on what your goals are, right?
Right,
As a
right.
practitioner. And so, my belief is that most people that want to start doing a martial art or want to start training, do it with the emphasis or the mindset of self-defense. They want to learn how to defend themselves. So they want to learn how to fight, or they want to learn how to, protect themselves or feel comfortable in a fight scenario. And then they hear about jujitsu. They heard that jujitsu is awesome, maybe for some friends, or maybe they watch the UFC and they hear the name jujitsu come up all the time. And they think, okay, I'm going to try jujitsu. And so what they do is they just kind of put their faith and their trust with the instructor, because coming in, if you don't know anything, you're like, okay, I'm just going to trust the expert to
Mm-hmm.
teach me what I need to know. And then I think it just kind of goes from there.
Okay, so you're talking about this huge evolution, essentially, right? It evolved from this fighting. What you mean by fighting was legit fighting, right? I think even UFC, the first beginning of UFC, or first few UFCs, it was kind of modified fighting. There were rules, there were stage, and so on.
Well, so a lot of people don't understand the first couple UFCs,
Right.
what was really going on, and it's a very different format than the UFC of today. The UFC back then, it was so gnarly. People don't even realize, like, there was no weight divisions. Okay. There was no gloves. Okay. They introduced gloves to protect the fighters that were striking, because so many guys were breaking their hands.
Yeah.
And what happened back then is there was no time limit. Punches to the groin strikes were allowed. If you guys remember the Joseon match, right? And
hair pulling, I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah.
You had to fight 3 guys in one night to win the tournament. It was a tournament style format. And so I think a lot of people don't realize, like, who's going to fight 3 guys in one night, no weight division, no time limit. And pretty much the only rules were no biting, no eye gouging, right?
Yeah, that was it. Yep.
So I think as in terms of being realistic, a realistic fight, that's about as close as it gets. That's about as close as you can make it, where people are willing to participate in, instead of these like fights, these legendary fight to the death or whatever, So I think when you're talking about because headbutts were allowed, which are not allowed nowadays. So rule set wise, that's about as close as you could ever possibly get, but you had to fight 3 guys in one night.
Yeah. So that had to be a rough night for all of them. I mean, that's
or 4 guys in one night. UFC
yeah.
2, it was 4 guys. So
right. So this evolution takes place, things go on, right? And at some point, at which point you get really involved into teaching and really emphasizing the fundamentals of jiu-jitsu, at which point this becomes an art, if you will, of self-defense versus the fighting.
Well, that's always been my focus. That's always so I started training in 1995 with Rickson Gracie.
Right.
Just to get in my background a little bit, I moved from Oklahoma when I was 20 years old, 20 years old, to California specifically to train with Rickson. And I started training with him in 1995. Now, in 1995, we still had challenge matches going on. The UFC started in 1993. So there were still challenge matches going on a weekly or monthly basis. Rickson was still fighting at the time, and competing actively competing in Japan. And so that was the type of training we were doing. It was mostly for fighting, because on any given day, some guy could walk into the academy and they would say, Henry, take your gi off. You're going to fight this guy. And so that was always kind of very present in my mind. Like, man, on any given day, I might be called upon to kind of represent the art, or, and that was really what the purpose of the challenge matches was to really help show people from other martial arts practitioners how effective jiu-jitsu is.
Yeah, and that's kind of very difficult to wrap our minds around today. I mean, we even talked to Chris Howder recently, and he told us, like, you get a phone call and you make your way to academy, and there's a guy. Yeah, well, figure it out. Drop your gi and you go.
Yeah. It was always take your gi top off, and or for me at least, take your gi. Sometimes guys would fight with the gi on, but take the gi top off and it was bare knuckles, and we would just throw down. So, and people don't realize, when you're fighting bare knuckle, that changes the dynamic of striking quite a bit too,
Well,
So,
yeah, once you get hit, things change drastically.
or if you throw a punch and you hit the guy in the wrong place, somewhere on the top of the head, now your hand's broken and you're not throwing punches anymore with that hand. So
Let me ask you this, because one of the things that Chris Howder talked about, that's why it was recommended never close the fist, always strike with an open hand. Was that a pure purpose with actually not hurting yourself?
So open palm strikes, yeah, exactly, was to not cause damage to yourself, right? And so when we were training, we would train with open hand strikes. Now, there are times that you can punch in places you can punch. You want to punch the soft parts of the body, but also for us, one of the big things that we would do is we would use elbows and knees a lot, because if you think about it, we're grapplers, we're close range fighters, and those are the tools of the close range fighter: elbows, knees, headbutts. And so those were kind of the main tools that we would train with, in order to, once you kind of have the fight on the ground, you don't want to give your opponent space, right? The more space you create, the easier it is for them to escape, the more opportunity there is for them to get out. So you want to still be able to control your opponent while still be able to do damage. And so, training with knees and elbows and headbutts is obviously for grapplers, very, very important. That was a tool that we used a lot.
Yeah.
So open palm strikes, and then those tools too, and kicks, kicks to help close the distance, kicks to help with certain things.
Yeah, I mean, so you're painting quite a realistic picture here. But when you look at self-defense, what we know today, or what a lot of people think what self-defense is, protecting yourself. But yet you're talking about all of this offensive approach. How is this all blend together? Do you see what I'm saying?
So no, you're what you're saying is like
Well, if I ask every
fighting.
person on the street today,
Mhm.
would you like to learn sort of self-defense? If somebody approaches and says, I
Mhm.
want to learn self-defense, a lot of people, what they think about it is, I want to know how to protect myself, but I don't want to attack. I don't want to be offensive about it.
Sure, and so that comes down to mindset. That comes down to, listen, you're going to try to avoid a confrontation
Hmm.
at all costs, but if the confrontation happens, okay, you need to be able to disable the threat as quickly as possible for your safety. The longer that there is a threat, the more chance you have of getting hurt, seriously hurt. And so that's the thing, is basically negating the threat as quickly as possible. And if you have punches and elbows and knees and headbutts and these tools available to you, why not use those, right? Because if you don't, you're at a disadvantage. I mean, and the thing is that, look, anytime you get into a fight, your life is at risk. So there was just a story in the news a week and a half ago here in Las Vegas. A 22-year veteran of the Connecticut State Trooper. He was a 22-year veteran. He was walking along one of the crossways, and walking the other way, a guy exchanges words with him. He's walking with some lady late at night. He goes on the escalator down the stairs, and the guy runs down the stairwell and meets him at the bottom of the escalator. Punches him once, and he's dead. So the guy got arrested, has a little bit of a background, but one punch, he killed the guy. And this happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize, like, this happens all the time. There's a story a couple years ago too. A guy was on the strip and got one punch killed. So anytime you're in a fight, your life is on the line, right? One punch can change everything. So you want to have all the knowledge and tools available for you to be able to protect your life or protect the life of someone else, right? If you need to get involved in a confrontation. And so I think that having that mindset is really, really important. Instead of just going for submissions or just having submissions available to you, having other tools, like if I can throw an elbow and knock someone out from the mount, instead of trying to set up an arm bar or trying to set up a head and arm choke, why not use it? Right.
Yeah,
And
no,
so
I
the
agree.
self-defense is definitely a mindset of, yes, you have all these tools available for you to be able to protect yourself. So it's not just, oh, I'm just going to be nice to this person, because when the threat comes to you, and sometimes it's not, it's unavoidable. I always encourage people to try to avoid confrontation at all costs. But like this specific incident here, I mean, where's the guy going to go? He's coming down an escalator with a lady, and the guy meets him at the bottom of the escalator.
Yeah.
So that is a great example of like, hey, sometimes you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know, maybe there's a chance that you cannot get away, or if you try to run, now you're leaving behind your family or your girlfriend or whatever, so you have to stay and deal with the situation. So what is the mindset, what are the tools that you have available to you to be able to do that?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And there's the other factor of too, if we don't strike back, if we don't take this offensive approach of protecting ourselves, we will be attacked. This will escalate very, very fast, and then things might get really out of control, where we might not be able to take any action whatsoever. Right. So I think that open mind that you talk about is so critical when it comes to these uncomfortable and risky situations where our life could be put at risk. So as all of this is unfolding, we talk about a lot of the self-defense and fighting, and you mentioned some of these unfortunate events. Sport continues unfolding, or starts growing, if you will, in a community of jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes actually quite popular. I mean, would you say that today's sport is more popular than the self-defense aspect of jiu-jitsu?
Absolutely. I think so. I think that is what is, I mean, if you look at what the magazines are covering, if you look at what gets all the coverage, absolutely, it is sports. I mean, look at Flow Grappling, right?
Yeah.
Their social media, that's what's being covered. That's where the media attention is. And, it's yeah.
It's more entertaining, isn't it?
More entertaining?
Well, as far as sport, right? I mean,
I don't know. I think the UFC is pretty entertaining.
Yeah. I think what Thomas meant, I don't know, maybe not, but I think it's more visually appealing, I think, to the masses than something like the old UFCs would be. And it's easier to sell.
I don't know. I mean, the UFC is a pretty big organization, right? It's a pretty big. So
well, I'm talking like the early days.
The early day UFCs, they had to change the rule set. They had to change it to be able to make it legal, to legalize it, right? Because it was banned in 36 states. They weren't even allowed to show it on pay-per-view. Right. And so the Fertittas bought the UFC for $2 million. They dumped a ton of money into it. They got it sanctioned in Las Vegas. And then they turned it into a sport, right? Where there's weight divisions, there's time limits. But do I think that sport jiu-jitsu is more entertaining than seeing actual fighting? I don't think anyone would. I mean, most people like watching fight. I mean, look at the audience of the UFC. Look how many people. I think fighting is so primal for us that people are drawn to it. I mean, they sold the UFC for $4 billion. That
was crazy.
The Fertittas. Yeah. So I think that they're struggling actually. Flow grappling is helping quite a bit, but they're struggling, and they're far behind monetary what they're paying their athletes than the UFC. So I think when you talk about viewership, when you talk about audience, I think real fighting is actually more entertaining than watching, because also you take a layman, they don't understand jiu-jitsu, they don't understand grappling, but they understand fighting. You see, and the commentators obviously in the UFC have helped a lot educate, fans what's going on when fights hit the ground. Like Joe Rogan's obviously huge proponent in that, just having a black belt and understanding what's going on. But I think fighting is, my personal belief is, fighting is way more entertaining because it's much more realistic, right?
And it's probably
much more practical.
Well, and it's probably more visually. It visually draws more of the audience in, right? There's a lot going on, standing and striking. And a lot of people are familiar with boxing as itself, as a separate sport. So
combat. I mean, people are drawn to combat arts in general, right? And when they can, especially when they can understand what's going on. It's taken a while for people to be educated on what's actually happening on the ground, and that's why look, in the UFC, the rule set of the UFC um, puts the grappler at a huge disadvantage. So grappling is at a huge disadvantage based on the rule set of the UFC, because as soon as, if a fight's on the ground and if there's not action, or it's boring,
Hmm.
they immediately stand the guys up,
Mhm.
right? You'll never see them put the guys on the ground when there's no action going on from the feet. And I've seen so many fights where the guys are just, they spend the first five
Laying on
minutes
the cage.
feeling each other out. They're feeling each other out. They're afraid to engage. They're afraid to strike. And the referee doesn't say, okay, guys, we're going to put you guys on the ground. So
Can you imagine that day? That would change things drastically. But you're right. Do you think that comes from the fact that jujitsu is so complex in a sense that there might be a lot of things going on under the hood and they are not so visual? And yet, when you have two individuals standing and they exchange punches, even in a very weak or very passive way, is by far more visible of what is happening.
yeah, absolutely. People understand it. People understand throwing a punch or throwing a kick, or hitting, right? I think the audience still does not understand, unless you train. And even people that are trained at the advanced level, you start to really understand the subtleties in the art, the subtleties, what's going on, what guys are trying to achieve. There's so much strategy, right? And there's so much technique from every position. So really understand and being able to see what people are going for. Um, you know, for most people, it just looks like two guys rolling around on the ground and it's
Mhm.
boring, right? They don't understand that each person is trying to achieve a very specific objective that's going to give them a huge advantage in the fight. And even though they're not punching, they're doing little movements, or they're shutting down movements, or trying to stop the person from advancing. So yeah, but even with that, right? Even with people not understanding, I mean, there's still a huge audience, huge viewership, and people are starting to understand submissions now, right? They know when someone's getting choked, they know when someone's uh, gets put in an arm bar, what that is. So they're understanding the submission aspects a lot better. Not, but I think the positional fight, the positional dominance, that is still kind of a little bit over, I think, the majority of the audience's head.
Yeah, and you talk about jujitsu as a complex art, and there's a lot of going on, even with just these little motions. How does one achieve that kind of level of expertise? Because that's essentially what it is. To use these minimal motions to their advantage, whether it's on the mat in a sport jujitsu, or training in the academy, or in something more, competitive like UFC or MMA fighting in a cage.
The only way to do it is by training, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the only way to get good at anything is by doing it. Yeah. I mean, you can read books on it all day, you can watch videos on it all day,
I
but
was
at the end
hoping
of
you were
the day,
going to
you
tell
got to
me a
do it.
secret or something here, because it seems like everybody wants to, a lot of people want to jump into this and have a little bit faster results than what it seems. At least in my opinion, jiu-jitsu takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of investment, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, to get good at anything does, right? But there's definitely ways, I think, that you can accelerate your progress. I think there's different things that people can do to achieve a higher level quicker, right? Time is definitely one of those things, but I mean, look, training smart is a huge thing too, because I mean, as you guys know, you guys are older guys. I mean, when you get injured, right? If you get injured, when you get injured, um, that puts you back a couple months. And not only the time that you're not able to train, but what happens is, so let's say you hurt your knee, or you hurt your elbow or your shoulder, and you're not able to train for 2 months. So it's not only taking those 2 months off to let your body recover, but once you come back to training, there's a little bit of time that it takes for you to kind of get your timing and rhythm and everything back, and your conditioning back, right? If you're not so it's usually takes, after a long period of time off, a couple weeks to a couple months to get all of that kind of timing, sensitivity, rhythm, movement back. So you're basically, you're off for 2 months, but it takes you 3 months to get back to where you were before the injury.
Yeah, I wish somebody told me this 10 or 15 years ago when I was younger. But it's like, I feel like sometimes when we are younger, we really want to go hard, or hard. We want to be intensive, and we want to have some of that offensive approach versus being
Well,
training
there's a lot of
smart
ego
about
in
it,
it
right?
too when you're younger, right? I think when you're younger, it's hard to admit to yourself
Sure.
that, hey, I need these days off.
And
Right.
that is I think a huge part of what the instructor is there for, is to dictate the
Mhm.
training, to help people understand the purpose of training, why they're training. It's not about, tapping people out. It's not about, that's not the only way to show progress. Giving people specific methods and ways of training that help them feel like they're improving without having to go hard or feel like every time they train, every match they train is like a competition,
Mhm.
Yeah, and matter of
so
fact,
that's up to the instructor.
right, and it's been proven over and over that sometimes hard is actually not the efficient way. It's slowing down and seeing the opportunities and seeing what the what's unfolding ahead of you might be by far more efficient, where you can set up traps and execute some of those
Yeah,
motions.
there's tons. I mean, jujitsu training methodology is I think in general is very far behind um, other sports when you
Mhm.
think about it. At a lot of gyms, they'll teach the class, they'll do the warm up, they'll teach the class, they'll show a couple techniques, and then everyone will roll afterwards, which doesn't make sense at all. They just do, okay, let's do 5-minute rounds, and everyone just roll. It doesn't make sense at all, because no other sport do they actually train like that. Every sport, if you want to really develop the athlete, you put them into specific situations that you want them to be able to improve. And so, you watch basketball, guys are doing free throws, they're doing layups, they're running drills. Soccer, same thing. Tennis, you're working on your forehand, you're working on your backhand, you're working on your serve. You break apart the game, you develop each aspect of the game, and then then you'll play matches, right? And in jiu-jitsu, they don't do that. It just play matches.
So why?
So
Why is
yeah,
that?
how do
Why
you
is that
do it in
happening?
a, well,
What's
what I wanted to ask is, how do you do that in a class that you, Henry, are teaching? How do you structure it then? So what do you do with that last 15 minutes or whatever when everybody else is rolling at other academies?
so so when I teach a class, okay, what I'll do is I'll pick a specific topic that day. Okay, today we're going to talk about the mount and how to maintain the mount. Okay, and these are the things that the person can try to do to get out. Okay, so that he's going to use this escape, he's going to use an elbow escape, he's going to use a trap and roll escape, and he's going to use a maybe what do they call it, where you push on the hips, the
Just a
hydraulic
shrimp.
escape or something like that,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So these are the things that he might do to try to get out. We know that. Now, this is what you're going to do to counter it. Okay, so he traps your arm, you're going to put your foot up on this side. He tries to elbow escape, you can block his head or you can lift your leg up. So you give them tools. And so then at the end, what I will do is I will create a training to help the student specifically develop what we just covered in class. So, end of class, here's what we're going to do. We'll do, it's called positional training.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put one guy on the bottom, the other guy's going to be on top of the mount. 2 minutes. It's a 2-minute round. The guy on the bottom has 2 minutes to get out. The guy on top, your job is just to maintain the position.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So he's just got to hold. He's just got to be able to stay there,
Hmm.
right? If the guy on the bottom gets out, you start again. That's it. If you can hold for 2 minutes, you win. So, oh wow, that's a mental victory if he can just stay there for 2 minutes. And then you have him train there. And then you reverse the position. The other guy gets to go. So everyone gets to basically train that specific thing that they just worked on that day. So it's one thing to learn the technique and do it against a partner who is cooperating. It's another thing to be able to perform the techniques live action. And so this kind of training really helps the students to be able to develop it live action, because the other thing too is it clears their mind of having to worry about anything else.
Everything else,
The
yeah.
only thing they are focusing on is this thing, is holding the position. And now I know I have these 3 different things that he could possibly do, or 4 different things, and now I'm just focusing on using what I learned today, right? Those 3 or 4 options. And so there's been a lot of books written on how to develop expertise, how to develop high level, and all of them basically talk about the same thing. Even the neuroscientists all talk about, developing your brain and the circuitry and the wiring of your brain all talks about intentional learning, like being very focused and having a specific intention anytime you're trying to learn something. And so, when you're just out there rolling or training, you don't have a specific thing. Or your intention is, I'm going to tap this guy or I'm not going to get tapped.
Right. Or everything you just learned for 20 minutes kind of just falls out of your head, right?
Well, here's the thing. Maybe you just learned mount escapes that how to hold the mount, but you never get mounted. So now you never have the ability to practice because you know what happens with most guys when you put them to train, open training, they go to their strong point. They go to immediately where they're strong. So if it's a big, heavy guy, he's going to try to bulldoze you over and try to pass your guard and get to the cross side.
Yep.
If you're dealing with the smaller, skinnier guys, more lanky guys, they're going to pull guard on you, right? So, or guys that are just comfortable in the guard, they just pull guard all the time. And so sometimes you spend 5 minutes trying to pass the guard and you can never pass the guard. So, we just learned mount, how to maintain mount, but I'm never ever going to get a chance to practice it. And especially while it's still fresh in my brain, right? And I just got through kind of learning the mechanics and feeling it, but I never really get to train it live action. So it's like a wasted class almost.
Well, what you're talking about is a continuous repetition of what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to learn, right? Positional training allows you to have that situation repeated over and over and continue experimenting, continue evolving it, right?
What the positional training does is it forces you to be in positions and deal with situations and circumstances that you normally would not. So it helps the student to be able to develop a well-rounded game, because most of the time people are only going to go to where they feel comfortable, where they're strong. They're not going to put themselves in bad positions.
Right.
Positional training does that. It forces you to be in bad positions. Craig Jones he just wrote an article or did an interview not long ago where he says that was one of the huge things for him when he started training with Danaher, is that they were doing so much positional training. And one of the things he realized about his game is he was just trying to explode and use physicality to get out of a lot of these situations, but he didn't really understand and know technically how to get out of a lot of these bad positions using little energy, using little effort. And so he was like, that is probably what helped his game evolve the most in the last couple of years of training, was this type of training, which, Craig, even being a high level black belt, right? That wasn't part of his normal regimen, his normal training. And he said that once he started doing that, it took his game to the next level. So, even guys that are extremely, extremely high level are still improving leaps and bounds by incorporating this type of training, which is the training that most people should be doing anyways. It should be the majority of the training. And that's what Rickson did, and that's what he trained all of us to do, is use this as the majority of the training. It also, by doing this type of training, it greatly reduces the risk of injury.
Oh, absolutely. Well, let me ask you this then. How come a lot of academies, and I would even go on a list here and say most of academies don't do that. They do some specific training, but I think there's some a lot of them gravitate towards open training, open sparring sessions. There's a lot of them out there.
I agree. I think what most people think is, this is more fun.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, sparring is fun, but it doesn't necessarily improve your skill. But
so it depends. It depends on what it depends on what your goals are. Do you just want to have fun? You just want to roll around and get a good workout? Or do you really want to develop to a high level of skill and develop, your comfort in all of these other positions, all these situations, all these positions, and sometimes, being in positions where you're constantly uncomfortable is not fun. Being on the bottom of mount against good guys is not normally fun. You want to do your game and do what you're good at. So yeah, it's a little bit of a mental challenge, I think, for a lot of people to, but after a while, like, the positional training for me is really fun, because I understand and I know, like, what is the purpose of this? And I create games in my head of, like, okay, I'm in this position or whatever, and and I'm just going to try to do this, or I'm just going to try to do that. And I create games out of it where, you are like, there's a mental reward, right? I'm like, oh yes, okay, great, I was able to get out just using this one move, or that's all I'm going to try to do. So it
Do you think?
can be fun, but it's all mindset. It's all mindset.
Yeah, and is that why people have gotten away from fundamentals so much? Because they want to have that fun, or they want to do that cool thing that they saw on Instagram.
I have no idea. That's. I mean, I don't know why. I'm sure that it probably has to do with, um, as jujitsu has become more widespread and passed on from generation to generation to generation. A lot of instructors focus on other things. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it's like a community thing, and I think too, the media too, what looks cool and what looks exciting, they show these moves that look very, very flashy and cool, and then everyone wants to do that because it looks cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant early on when I was saying that it's more that aspect is more entertaining, not so much against fighting, putting it up against fighting, but that the barambolos and stuff like, and the crazy flying arm bars and stuff, all of that is so much more entertaining to sell to people than the grind of, being on bottom, or, um, trying to escape, from different positions that are super uncomfortable, where, yeah, somebody who's
yeah,
40 pounds heavier than you and knows what they're doing is got you smashed.
I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask. I think for that would be a very, very personal question, right? For me, it was always entertaining. I'd watch a high level black belt, like a world champion, come in and Rickson, uh, roll with him and cross collar choke him from the mount 6 times in a row in 10 minutes. That for me was always like eye opening, entertaining, like inspiring, all of the above, like jaw on the ground, like I just can't believe that. Wow. I mean, it's like, for me, it's like watching Michael Jordan play basketball, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it depends. It depends on where your mindset is, and what your, for me, that's impressive to me. That's entertaining to me when you can see a guy basically do what he wants with another person and they can't stop it.
and
Mhm.
you're right. I mean, I remember watching Hidden Gracie being at Worlds. I don't remember which year this was, early 2000s, but I remember literally him cleaning the entire division with the same sweep and the same collar choke right from the top, cross choke. I mean, literally clean the division, and you could see him miles
Right.
away what he would do, and yet worked every single time. And this is
Yeah,
not
I
just
forget
some
what year it
beginners.
is,
You're
but
talking about top
he's
level.
right. I think it was, yeah, he finished the world's, his division in the absolute. I think there were 10 matches with the cross collar choke in the mount,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
which is a move that everyone learns when they're a white belt, right? That's
I
a
know,
technique
right?
you learn as a white belt. And so to me, that's way more impressive than like a berimbolo or this or that, is that when you can impose your will on another person and they know it's coming and they can't stop it. That to me shows mastery, right?
Mhm.
So, what do you tell your students? So, let's dig into that a little bit. What do you tell? So, what is your mental, what is your approach, um, towards your students if they want to learn some of these fancy things and they're just starting the jujitsu, or maybe they've been doing that that long? How do you approach that situation?
Well, for me, I just give them my honest experience. Hey, listen, this is why I do this, and this is why. And if you want to train that, that's up to you. You can commit time and energy into doing that, but the time and energy you commit to learning this technique, you're taking time and energy away from mastering other
Yep.
techniques. And just so you know, like if you want to do this technique, if you were to ever try to use it in a fight, maybe the guy doesn't have a long sleeve on, so you're not going to have that grip available to you always. So like I teach my students not to rely on grips, right? So don't rely on the sleeve grip, not rely on, because you know I, I was in Southern California for 25 years. People are in t-shirt and shorts most
Hmm.
of the year. So you
Yeah.
don't have grips. So, I would tell them that, or hey, listen, you can do that or you can train that, but just be careful, because if you were ever to get in a fight, your head's right here, your head's exposed. So you have to be careful that you might get elbowed if you try to do this, because listen, at the end of the day, how you train is how you're going to fight. When it happens, you go on autopilot. You basically just react
Yeah.
to the training, and so those are things that, as a responsible instructor, you have to help your students with. And then at the end of the day, they take that into their own hands, right? Their training is their training, and whatever they want to get out of it is up to them, but as an instructor, and especially when most people that come to jiu-jitsu want to learn how to protect themselves, it's my responsibility to tell them, like, hey, these techniques might not be ideal for you if you get in a fight.
Yeah, and those are, I think, very important points, really, to identify training versus real fight, and how are you going to respond in those situations. And if the training is not done efficiently or properly, obviously your response during the fight itself, even during sparring sessions, is not going to be the same, right? And you talked about the positional training having a huge foundation of some of that skill set, growth of the skill set. Gary and I, we talked about this several times on this show with different guests, but like there are different ways of learning, right? There's a class scenario, there's a seminar scenario, which is slightly different. You have private lessons, which is completely different than a class. You definitely have these positional training, there's drilling, there is sparring too. And the trick is how you balance between these different opportunities to train, because we all agree there's only X amount of time in a day when we can devote to this art, sport, hobby, whatever, however you approach it. But if you're distracted with other things, you're really taking away from these other opportunities that you could be learning. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's really important. Like, you have to decide where you're going to commit your energy, what techniques. I mean, because look, man, there's so many techniques available in jiu-jitsu, thousands and thousands. It would take several lifetimes to be able to master all of the techniques in jiu-jitsu. And if you look at all the top guys in the world, you'll see they all have different styles. Everyone does things a little differently. Some guys like an over under pass. Some guys, are really good at attacking the legs. Some guys go for the back all the time. Some guys are great guard passers. Some guys are great guard players, So, and then there's all kinds of different guards. There's, 15, 20 different styles of guard. So, for me, it's really like, hey, listen, there's all this stuff out there. It's up to you, the student, to decide what you're going to commit your time and focus. And so also for me as the instructor, right, of course, there's all this stuff out available on YouTube, and there's all these other ways of learning and collecting information and seeing everything that's out there. But for me, what I do is I teach the fundamentals. I say this is the stuff that's going to work, gi, no gi, or in a fight, right? If you're fighting, we'll put our time in that. And if you want to train other things, that's fine. You'll train other things, but that's just not what I'm going to teach. If you want to learn that by yourself, if you want to go do that, that's great. And also when it comes to competing too, like, people don't realize that the basics are very, very work in competing. Look at Hidden Gracie, so you're talking about one of the I mean, he probably is, what I consider is after Rickson was like the next generation GOAT, right? I mean, to see him come out of retirement, go against Buchecha, who was the 8-time world champion or whatever, the current world champion that's 12 or 13 or 14 years younger, 20 something pounds heavier, and submit him 2 minutes after it hits the ground. That's pretty incredible. Right. And what did he do? Well, he pulled guard, he did an arm drag to the back, and he caught him with a bow and arrow choke. So how many people, by the time you're a blue belt, do not know how to do an arm drag, take the back, and do a bow and arrow choke? Everybody, right? How many people can do that against Buchecha? So mastery of the basics is so important. And that's what really Hodger has done is, wow, he made it look so easy, right? So that's for me, that's what I really try to help my students, because as an instructor, my job is to give them guidance, right? But it's not to force them to have my style.
Right. You're not making little Henrys, right?
And that's the thing is this is a martial art, right? Everyone will develop their own style. You have a bunch of students, you teach a class, and you have the same guys that show up to class all the time. But guess what? Some guys like to be on top. Some guys like to be on the bottom. Some guys have a really good triangle. Some guys have a good head and arm choke. Some guy, he likes to guillotine all the time. So everyone will develop their own style based on their body type, based on their mindset, right? But my job is to basically help give guidance. Okay, so this is what I encourage you to do. But at the end of the day, the development is half on the instructor and half on the student, right? Yeah. It's a cooperation. And so as an instructor, I can only do so much, right? And at the end of the day, they're going to have to trust me, and hopefully that's, the students trust the instructor. And but also there's like I said, there's so much to learn, and all of it is fun, right? But also we all have limited time, and there are some techniques and some things that are going to be far more effective and helpful for you if you get into a situation where you need to protect your life, where you're in a fight, than other techniques.
Yeah, and I think going back to the style conversation, if you will, this is something really important that I talk to my students often. If you look at even the high level competitors or well-established black belts, they all know a lot of things, but they are not masters of everything. They're usually masters of one thing or maybe two things. I think the trick comes in that they can, like a spider web, they can always lead you into what they are really good at. And once they have
well, they all have like specific systems, right? Like
right.
After a while, after training, you have specific systems. You know that if you do this, the guy is more than likely going to do this, and then you'll have these options. And so all these guys, after training for quite a bit of time, they have specific systems and ways they deal with certain situations, right? Okay, from half guard, this is how I'm going to hold, or from cross side, this is how I'm going to hold. And if the guy does this is how I'm going to get my leg out, or this is how I'm going to. So yeah, everybody kind of develops their own way to go about dealing with specific situations.
I think that's the beautiful part.
And then there's a flow to it.
Right. More efficient you are with these systems, if you will, or within your system, then more successful you're going to be. So all boils down to fundamentals. Essentially, that's what we are talking about today. So,
well, I mean, in those systems, you want to make sure you have options, right, for whatever possibilities. And so, like when you talk about systems, what they do is they find a very specific situation or circumstance, and they know that from that situation or circumstance, there's only so many possibilities of dealing with it. And so then there's answers for those possibilities. That's really how these kind of systems are created, right? We do this, and we know from this type of control, or from this type of holding position, or from this type of situation, the person is more than likely going to do A or B. And if they do A or B, then we have this to counter it, or this to deal with it, or this to be able to catch them.
It's all about these options and outweighing the risks.
Yeah, but the fundamentals, I think, is very different. The fundamentals are is really having a deep level of understanding of the basics of jiu-jitsu, and also understanding, I guess, more so the art. I was actually teaching. I'm teaching. I live in Vegas now, and I've been teaching an instructor here. He has a couple schools here in the Las Vegas area, and I've been teaching him recently. And he said to me the other day, he was like, "Wow, man, it's so crazy. I'm learning so much, and all this stuff is stuff that I've already done before, but I'm just learning so many details and getting so much out of like our time together." And I said, that's really awesome. That's something that I hear a lot. These are all, for me, just basics and fundamentals. It's just like all stuff that you learn from a white belt, but we're just going much deeper into it, into the little nuances, little details, and helping you understand how to use these better and use them more efficiently and more effectively. And one of the things that, as we were talking, I said, there's a lot of guys that they don't really know the art. They don't understand jiu-jitsu. They basically have a collection of techniques. So I know 50 techniques or 100 techniques. I'm an instructor and I teach, and these are the 100 techniques that I know and do. And he said, yeah, that's how I feel. That's what I feel about myself after training with you a little bit, is that I feel like I have all these techniques that I know, but I don't really understand the art, which is very, very different, because it's really understanding the purpose and the reason why you do every single movement you do. If I put my hand here, there's a purpose for it. If I put my hand there, there's a purpose for it. If I'm on my toes, there's a purpose for it. If my leg goes here, if I'm relaxed here, there's a purpose for it. So really having a deep level of understanding of every single movement you make is so important, because I always tell people, if you're moving and you don't know why you did it, the reason you did it, it's wasted movement. A lot of people do moves just based on because my teacher told me to do this, or I'm going to do this 3 or 4 step series because that's what I was taught. Every step in the series has a purpose, right? And so if you don't understand the purpose for every single step in that series in each technique, well, you don't really know and understand that technique, because once you understand the movements, you also understand how to counter, right?
Do you think that's why concept learning is so powerful? Because big part of that is really understanding what the purpose is and why mechanically it works versus learning the 5 or 7 steps and then you move on.
Yeah, absolutely. You need both, right? You need both. You need to help teach people the concepts, the ideas, and then the technique is the method by which we go about achieving that, right? So the concept here is, okay, guys, when I'm mounted, my job is to stay on the mount. Okay, why do I want to stay on the mount? Because it's such a dominant position. If I'm in a fight, I have the huge advantage with strikes. It's much harder for them to hit me, and then I have all these submissions available, and it's very difficult for the guy on the bottom to submit me. So that's why it's so important to stay on the mount. Now, then you have the concept. So your job is to basically, okay, when I get here, the longer that I can stay in this position in a fight, the greater chance I have of not getting injured, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you teach them the technique. So this is the method by which we're going to go about maintaining this position. There's a lot of things the guy can do on the bottom to get you off. He can sit up and try to push you off. He can throw you off to the side. He can bump his hips. He can do this, And so then you say, okay, if the guy tries to push you backwards, this is what you do. If the guy tries to push you to the side, this is what you do. So then you go about explaining the technique. So it goes together. You're not just learning, okay, the guy can do this and then you do this. Hey, this is the purpose. Your purpose, the goal for you is to stay on the mount, right? And it's very, very important that you maintain this position if you can ever get here. And this is the method by which we're going to go about achieving that, right? As the person's trying to get out.
Gary,
Yeah,
I know
like
you had a lot of questions from your perspective. You've been training jiu-jitsu not as,
nowhere near as long as you
not,
guys. No.
well,
How
yeah,
long?
yeah, that's the
I've been at
reality,
it.
so
I've been at it for just over 4 years now,
Okay.
and I think it took a long time for me to understand the concepts. Right, I was for a very long time. I was in that ABC move, this series of techniques and back again, and just as you were just talking now, I was thinking about my own training and what I've been doing a little bit more so lately, and it's like I like right now, I enjoy when I get to side control, but I've been getting frustrated because it's like I can't finish. Right, I'm doing a decent job of escaping. I'm doing a decent job of getting to side, and I'm doing a decent job of keeping it, and I couldn't finish. And I've kind of backtracked a little bit to say, okay, why am I keeping it? Right, what can I work on to make that better? Because I think at some point, once all of that is natural, and I understand that better, I think the finishes might start coming naturally a little more often, and to not get hung up on that end result. And it's for me right now, and I hope that I'm thinking about it correctly, is it's the process of getting to where my ultimate goal.
Well, the first step in being able to finish is feeling comfortable maintaining the position.
Mm-hmm.
So the longer that you can maintain a position, the more time you have to finish. So if I get to the cross side and then the guy's out in 13 seconds, it means I had 13 seconds to be able to finish him. So on your journey, right, once you understand what are the good positions to get to. So the first thing we want to understand is what are the good positions you want to be in, what are the bad positions you want to be in, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are the positions where you have the advantage and you have where you don't have the advantage. Our goal is always to get out of the bad positions and get into the better positions, right? So there's a hierarchy of dominant positions versus non-dominant positions. Once you get into those dominant positions, then your job is to maintain that position. The longer that you can maintain that position, the longer that you're theoretically safe from taking damage, right? Except the guard, where like closed guard, you have the ability to control distance from the guard when you're on your back. Then once you can maintain those positions, you feel comfortable maintaining the position, then you have all the time in the world to attack. So it's that's kind of the learning process anyways, is most of the time when a student starts out, okay, and they don't know anything, it's their first class or whatever, they're completely getting dominated, right? They're getting put in bad positions. They're on the bottom all the time. They're on the bottom of cross-eyed, or they're getting mounted all the time. Eventually they learn, hey, I'm on the bottom all the time. I'm going to start putting guys in my guard. I'm going to try to catch them in my guard. That's a good position for me. At least I can do something to defend myself. And so then, that's why you have a lot of newer students. The first position that they really start to feel comfortable and develop is the guard. But after a while, right, they say, okay, now I know I'm in these bad positions all the time. Now I kind of understand what attacks they're going to go for, so I can start to keep myself safe. So you'll notice as the student progresses, like you used to be able to just tap them out, every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, whatever. And now it's taking a minute or so to get the tap. And then eventually what happens is not only are they able to stay safe in those positions, but now they start to understand how to get out of these positions, right? And so then as they get out of these positions, eventually they'll start to learn, okay, now that I got out of this position, what position do I want to get to? I want to get to a dominant position. So that's kind of like the natural progression, is learning to deal with all the bad situations, learning to be safe first, then learning how to escape bad positions, then learning how to get to good positions, learning how to maintain those dominant positions, and then, learning like the finishes is usually like, in the overall scheme of things, kind of the last area that most people develop, on that path. Because when you first start out at a gym, you walk in, everyone's better than you, right? Or everyone that's been trained, unless there's another new student that day. So
yeah, you talk about like these stages of learning, right? First, get comfortable in these bad spots, protect yourself. 2, you can start moving on to escaping. 3, you regain control of the situation. And the last final stage, which typically comes at the end, is the attack. You turn all of this into the offensive approach, and you take advantage of some of these situations. So I mean, that's pure wisdom right there. I mean, I love it, all of this. I love it. If you had to talk to us a little bit more about the sport versus self-defense. That's one of the things before we wrap up this episode, is what are your thoughts on this split, if you will? I don't know if split is the word here, but
yeah, I don't know if
you know what I
it's so
mean
much
by
I
this.
don't even know if it's so much of a split. I think it's just a mindset thing. And I think it's for a lot of instructors, I think their focus is like, hey, we want to represent our school, we want to go to tournaments and get gold medals, and
And there's
this
nothing
is
wrong
what
with that.
looks cool. There is and there isn't.
Okay.
And if a student comes to your school and says, I want to compete in tournaments and I want to win medals, and that's the path you lead them on, there's nothing wrong with that. If a student comes to your school and says, I want to learn how to defend myself, and you never teach them how to block a punch, you never teach them how to close the distance and clinch with someone that's throwing strikes, you never teach him how to throw strikes from different positions, then you're doing him a disservice. You're not being honest with him.
You're not being honest. Yeah.
So
yeah, we talked to Pedro Valente recently, and he was like, if you teach with integrity and honesty, then it doesn't matter what you're teaching. As long as the skill level is there and stuff.
Right.
And if you tell somebody that's like, hey, I want to win gold medals, Pedro said, well, this isn't the school for you. Let me help you find someplace else. And I think that's like one of the most important things, I think, because if I would have came into where I'm at now, saying, this is something I always wanted to try, and I want to learn some self-defense, and it was this competition based school, I probably would have left right away.
Well, I think a lot of instructors are not willing to be honest with themselves and their students. There's a mindset out there that someone that trains jiu-jitsu, even sport jiu-jitsu, has the ability to defend themselves, and that is true, right? For the most part, that is true. But that's the same thing as saying someone that does wrestling has the ability to defend themselves. I would actually even argue that wrestling, a wrestler just training sport wrestling, sport jiu-jitsu might even have an advantage because wrestlers are so good at taking the top position, right? And you know, anytime when you're on top in a fight, you have the ability to do more damage, right?
Mhm.
You saw that with there was a huge period of time in the 90s where ground and pound, where you had wrestlers dominating
Oh
MMA, and
yeah.
all they would do is take people down,
Yeah, Matt
sit
Hughes.
in
Yep.
between their legs, and basically do damage, right? And win fights with that strategy. So, I mean, you could say the same thing. Wrestling, yeah, you do wrestling, and you, if you learn the sport of wrestling, you know, you can defend yourself. But I don't think most students, you know, most students, what they do is um, they give up all control to the instructor because they don't know any better, right? They're putting trust in the instructor. They're saying, hey, you're a black belt, you're the expert. I want you to teach me. I think most students, when they come into a jiu-jitsu school, do not come in with the intention of being a world champion. They want to learn how to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you know, the instructor, even though you're teaching them all these techniques, has to be, you know, they have to do a little bit of soul searching and really come from integrity and say, hey, listen, will these techniques, is this stuff that I'm teaching, is it going to really help this student if he gets in a fight with someone who's throwing punches at him and trying to headbutt him and trying to knee him? And, you know, there's a huge portion of techniques that just are not quite effective in those type of scenarios. So, um, yeah, I think, you know, that really it comes back to mindset. You know, are you training with strikes? Because that's what really is going to happen in a street fight, right? You're not training against a guy in a street fight. More than likely, you're not training against a guy who's trying to ankle lock your submit,
That
right?
is very true.
He's trying to beat you up. He's trying to throw elbows. He's going to headbutt you. He's going to try to strike, do groin strikes or whatever, kick you. And are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for that type of encounter? And unfortunately, most of the training nowadays, where guys start off on their knees or they start by immediately sitting on the ground, is not going to prepare someone for that type of encounter. You know, if
Which
you're
is
not training takedowns, if you're
yeah.
not training clinching, right? How to clinch with strikes in the environment of strikes, not just, you know, takedowns is great, training takedowns is great, but how do you get there? How do you get there without getting hit? Because look, one punch can change everything. If you try to engage someone and you get punched, one punch can kill you, or one punch could break your nose and now your eyes are watering and now you can't breathe and now you're struggling. It can completely change the momentum of a fight. So are you training your students in those specific situations, which are going to be more than likely what they're going to encounter on the street, not rolling around on a very soft padded surface? So there's even a lot of takedowns that you would not want to do on the street or concrete, like dropping
Absolutely.
for a double leg and dropping your dropping your knee on the ground. I'm telling you, I've hit
Yeah.
my knee on the ground. It's not
No,
fun,
I shouldn't
you
do
know.
a drop sayonage in the parking lot. No.
So
which is a
there's
separate topic altogether. Is like, why are you training starting from your knees? I mean, there's a very common practice in jiu-jitsu, especially during sparring sessions, right?
well,
um
I'll tell you why they do it. Okay, the reason they do it is for safety, right? They think so. This happened, God, probably my first 2 months when I was at Rickson's. Um, we were training from the feet. Another group hit the ground, and one guy was on the ground, and he had posted on his hand, like put his hand behind him to get back up, and another guy got thrown on top of his arm, snapped his arm in half, and it was a pretty horrific accident. But I think in a lot of jiu-jitsu schools, just because they're so afraid of bodies dropping on top of other bodies, you know, people rolling around and then another group throwing and falling on top of other people, that's, at least at my school, why we would focus. Okay, today we're going to do just focus on stand up, so we're not having people are not falling on top of each other, and then we'll focus on ground, or we make sure that there's enough space
mhm.
around the groups, right? Which a lot of jiu-jitsu schools are limited on their space, right? That there's enough space around to be able to train that way safely. where you're not having bodies falling on top of other bodies.
And I think safety is one of the primary concerns for any instructor and a lot of students altogether, right? I mean, this is a combat sport, right? So even getting punched in the face is a concern, right? Especially if you have a professional job, you don't want to go to the office with a black eye. Like, I mean, these are serious topics. But at the same time, I'll tell you this. The people who are afraid of getting tossed or doing judo or throws, things of that nature, they will do twisters and spine attacks and heel hooks, knee reapings and other things, which are dangerous too. So, like, I think there's a factor of how do you create a safe environment. And I think safe is an important part, but taking away stand up game and striking and engagement when you're on your feet, it's, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a big fan of judo. I'm a big fan of standing up personally, at least in my academy. We don't stand up all the time, but it's part of it. It's a present part of the game.
Well, even for me, like, so judo, for example, and I've trained some judo, and the art is beautiful, and I'm a huge fan of the art. But even judo, for me, like when I teach my students, right, for me, most of the takedowns we focus on are from the clinch.
Mm-hmm.
And so where basically we either have, an over under or double unders, or, we start from that situation, because for me, and I used to have a judo class at my school too. But one of the things I always tell people is that with judo, because most of the throws are relying on the grips, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the huge part of judo is grip fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you get your grips. And the problem with starting teaching your students to be comfortable throwing from there is basically, I call that hockey player range, which basically you're learning how to throw people or keep people basically on the end of your punch. And so if you're doing judo with punches, that changes everything.
Absolutely.
Right. So
you are in the range.
So you're not going to hold people at that range when they're pulling your gi and throwing punches on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was even an MMA match in Japan. I think it was a gold medalist in the Olympics, a Japanese guy, Japanese judoka. It was either the gold or the silver medalist in the Olympics. And it was an MMA, and he fought with a gi on. And man, he just had his gi, the guy was controlling with his gi and just hammering him away. And so for me, I think when it comes to takedowns, ideally Greco-Roman style, and then some traditional, like folk style or whatever wrestling is or freestyle wrestling is probably ideal, but basically teaching students basically how to feel comfortable getting to that clinch position, which is the position that you see boxers get to all the time. Anytime they start taking damage or getting uncomfortable, they start to clinch because they don't want to get hit anymore. Right. And then understanding how to execute takedowns from that position, for me, has kind of always been my focus. Instead of, even though I love judo, I love the takedowns. I've trained with some high level judo people, but and I love the throws. The throws are beautiful, but feeling comfortable at that range where you're basically on the end of someone's punch is something that I try to teach my students not to do.
Awesome. Beautiful. I mean, there's pure wisdom. I mean, you're sharing so much deep information and so many important points behind the art of jiu-jitsu. Henry, before we wrap this up, we do this end of each episode. We have 5 kind of rapid questions for you, if you don't mind. Some of them are funny, some of them are serious, but it generates an interesting end to the show. And Gary will take a lead on this if you're okay with it.
Okay.
All right. So I know, you left Oklahoma specifically to train, and that's a huge deal. So when you got there, what was it like the first time you stepped on that mat?
Well, the first time I walked into Rickson's gym, within 5 minutes, I saw someone get put to sleep. And I went to train with a buddy of mine. And I saw them like holding up the guy's legs, shaking his legs, to kind of wake him up, like get the blood flowing back to the brain. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my buddy right away. We looked at each other and I'm like, we're in the right place. This is where we came for. This is the right place.
So determining factor whether you stayed or not.
That says a lot about your mindset, because a lot of people would have looked at each other and turned around and walked out the door. But I think so then stepping on the mat, what was it like? Were you amped, exhilarated, ready?
Yeah, I mean, the first time stepping on the mat, I was, look, I was a tough kid. Worked out, I thought I was a tough kid. I had been in quite a few street fights. Was strong, was very physical, and I got manhandled. I think that's most people's first experience in jiu-jitsu. I was getting manhandled and dominated in a way that I've never been. I mean, I was literally getting played with. And so right after that, after that week of training, I came out for a week, trained, and then I decided I was going to move to, I came out during it was like a Thanksgiving break or something like that, right? Spring break or Thanksgiving break. And right after that, I decided I'm going to move. I have to learn this art. It's, I'm going to commit myself to learning this, because for me, it felt like having superpowers.
How soon after, this is a separate question, but how soon after you got to Rickson's Academy, you actually got to train with him? I mean like hands-on with him, not only in a class, but had the opportunity to train with him?
Oh, probably a couple of days.
Now, see, this is amazing.
Yeah,
a lot of instructors don't even do that. I mean, that's. Did you know the magnitude of the situation that you were in? Did you I mean, obviously you knew who Rickson was, but did you realize what was going on?
I mean, obviously I knew he was the best of all the Gracies. I went to LA specifically to train with him. I sought him out. And so to be able to, I mean, look, training with Rickson, even at the black belt level, very few people will ever understand his true level, because he basically makes everyone look like a white belt. So the magnitude of it, I mean, for me, it was like, wow, I get to train with this guy who's like the best in the world at what he does. And it was, I was really, really fortunate, especially during those early years, the first 5 years, that I got to train with him every week. I got to roll with him and got to feel what he does and get to kind of see how he trains. And so, and all of that I've kind of taken with me, and it's been a huge influence in my teaching. So, I think a lot of times when we go through these experiences in life, you don't realize the magnitude until later on, looking back, like, wow, how much that affected my life, how much that influenced my life, like how that changed me as a person, or how that made me the person I am today. It's hard to understand the significance of those events, right? I talk about that a lot of times with, like terrible events that we go through in life, or hard times that we go through in life, usually tend to be periods of the most growth and development. And when you're in it, in the moment, you can't see it. You're in the shit, right? But then 5 years later, looking back, you're like, wow, I grew so much from that, or I learned so much from that, or that changed my life so much. If that never happened to me, I would never be where I am today, or I'd never have this or that, or have done these things. And so kind of like blessings in disguise, right? And so that's really, for me, I was there kind of at a time, it was kind of a magical time, because, it was still very early on. There wasn't a ton of people training. Rickson was still very, very active. He was still fighting. His last fight was in 2000. So I got to see and witness all of that, and see Rickson training every day, see all these guys from Brazil coming in, every month or every couple months, and him training with all of the top guys from Brazil that would come in. And I became the secretary at the school. And so I basically, because I moved from Oklahoma to California, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any outside distractions. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anything to do. I moved there specifically to train. So I was at the academy like 70 hours a week. And so I just got to see so much. I got exposed to so much jiu-jitsu. It was really kind of like a magical time.
I bet. Gary?
All right. What has been your most rewarding achievement?
On and off the mat.
Gosh, I mean, obviously my black belt was a huge thing when I first decided, okay, I'm going to move, and change my life and I'm going to do jujitsu. And my goal is to get a black belt from Rickson, because at the time, no American had achieved that. And so to finally be one of the guys that had received a black belt from him was a huge thing. Giving out my first black belts a couple of years ago, I rewarded two guys, Mike Pekarsky and Ed Walworth, with black belts a couple of years ago. That was a huge achievement for me, just because I had transitioned into an instructor. And as an instructor, you want to be able to build your students, right? You want to make sure that you're passing on the art to others. You want to, you want to pass on this knowledge that has kind of benefited your life so much. And so being able to do that was huge.
Were those guys that started with you as white belts?
No, neither of them started with me at white belt. They had both come from other gyms, but they had just spent an incredible amount of time with me, and we've kind of worked them back up and really helped them to understand the art. And it's interesting because they both have very, very different styles, but they both are very, very, very effective and very skilled, and not only as teachers and not only as having the knowledge to be able to pass on the art, but also the ability to execute, right? They're great practitioners and they're great teachers. So that's important for me, that when I give out a black belt, for me, what I'm telling other people is, like, this person, a lot of people see a black belt as an expert. And I'll tell you, like, as a black belt, and I've been a black belt now for 16 years. Yeah. 16, 17 years now. 17 years. So as a black belt, you're not an expert at all. You learn so much, right? Like, I've grown and learned so much the last 17 years. But for me, what's important is that they can pass on the fundamentals, that they can pass on the art. A lot of times when people get a black belt, what do they want to do? They want to go open up a school or go, start teaching themselves. And so that's really what I'm proud of, is giving them the knowledge to be able to pass on the art the way that I learned it.
Wonderful. Have you ever wanted to quit?
Yes, I had probably one time where I thought about quitting. There was a period of time where I had thought about quitting, and that was after my best friend Rickson's son Hoxton passed away. He was my training partner, and he had passed away, and I didn't. It was just very, very difficult for me to get back to training and get back into training. And it was actually one of my instructors at the time, Luis Heredia, who I always give credit for, who was the one that encouraged me and brought me back to the mat. So without Luis Heredia, I would have never gotten my black belt. I would have never been a black belt, because he was the one that really pushed me to come back and start training. And I was just so, I was 25 years old, and I was just so filled with grief. It was just, every time I would come back, to even think about training, I would come back to the gym and I would just sit and just start bawling. And so then I'd have to leave, because I just couldn't control, when you're that young, you don't really, it was my first experience with death, and especially death of someone who I consider like a brother. Right. And so, learned a lot from that experience about life and just,
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Describe your feelings when you received your black belt. So we talked a little bit about that you got it, and what it was like, but what were you feeling?
Yeah. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
It's the same thing, like every time I got any of my belts, right? For me, I'm very hard on myself. And the other thing, having Rickson as my teacher, I never felt like I deserved any of my belts. I just didn't, because there was such a high standard, right? And I'm like, how can I'm a black belt, he's a black belt, and he can do whatever he wants with me, and I knew, like, my level wise, I was tough. Like, I was already, training very, very well with a lot of high level black belts at the time, because we'd have all of these guys coming and visiting the school. And but I always tried to hold myself to a very, very high standard. And so the first thing when he gave it to me, I was just like, I don't feel like I deserve this, and wow, this is a huge, not so much a burden, but I wanted to make sure that I represented the belt well. You know, I put a lot of pressure on myself to really, live up to Rickson's standards.
Nice.
Makes sense.
Nice. All right. And since we're talking about belts, do you wash your belt?
Do I wash sometimes? Very, very rarely. Very rarely.
We
I
have
mean, I know. So I think a lot of people consider it like a hygiene thing.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, people didn't wash their belts, right? Um, for me, like almost always, I'm training in a gi, and I always wear a t-shirt underneath my gi. So when it comes to hygiene, like all the sweat is basically absorbed by my gi. So like my belt never ever got to the point where it's you know smells bad. If it did get to the point where it started to smell, I would wash it, right? But yeah, I do wash my belt
needed.
but I wash my gi every time after I'm done training. My gi always gets washed, right? My belt.
We've talked to some people who were like, yeah, back in the day, we didn't even wash our gis. We just hung them out in the sun. And I'm just like,
Yeah, that was the
wow,
Brazilian.
what?
That was the Brazilian way, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it was not pleasant training with those guys. That would just they would do an afternoon training. They would hang them up. They'd be nice and crispy by the time the evening training came, and it would literally be
Jeez.
crunchy. And
No thanks.
it
man.
creates
No,
good
thank you.
memories, I guess.
Well,
Henry,
yeah, good stories, maybe not good memories.
yeah. Henry, thank you for sharing all the wisdom, all the awesome stories from your past, from your experiences. Before we wrap this up, where can listeners find you if anybody wants to connect with you? Social media, websites, anything?
yeah, I have a fan page on Facebook, so you can follow me on my personal page, and I also have a fan page on Facebook, and I also have a group page where the focus of the group is just to talk about my jiu-jitsu or the jiu-jitsu that I'm teaching. And it's hiddenjiujitsu.com is the Facebook private group. And then if they want to find any of my teaching, it's on hiddenjiujitsu.com. So that was a huge thing for me about probably 6-7 years ago. The focus for me was really to try to pass on the jiu-jitsu that I learned from Rickson and to share it with the world, because there's so many things as I started traveling around the world teaching that I started to recognize and notice that we do very different than other people. And I was always like, why do they not know this? Like, this is just the basics for me. It was the fundamentals. Who'd you get your black belt under?
So I started with Rickson Gracie Senior.
Okay.
And then, yeah. So, and then my life took me in different directions, but that was my initial start. Yeah.
And then you got your black belt from who?
I got it from Christian Oflacher.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, with every, you'll probably realize this, different lineages have different ways of doing things, right?
Yeah.
Because you've been with different teachers and you're like, okay, this teacher showed me this way to do it. This teacher showed me this way. And there's different details and reasons for it. And so, the way that Rickson goes about his basics, there's such a level of depth and detail into every movement that he makes. And so the goal for me was really to start to share this information with the jiu-jitsu community, because I feel like we're all one big family. And so that's what I started to do. I created a website to be able to really give access to all these people who never basically had an opportunity to train with Rickson or learn from him.
Yeah, I love watching, especially the more recent instructions from Rickson himself. There was so much, the amount of detail that he shares, it's ridiculous. So I can only imagine being there every day, training with him, going through these classes. I mean, that would be mind-blowing for me.
Yeah, Rickson's real, his ability to teach, his where he excels at teaching. As a teacher, there's 3 different kind of ways that students learn: is audially, visually, and kinesthetically, right? You can hear what the instructor is saying, you could see what he's doing, and then you could feel, right? And where Rickson excels is the kinesthetic. If you really want to learn from Rickson, you got to feel what he does, because when he starts to do the techniques, it feels so different than anything. And that's like the feedback that I get from all these people that have attended his seminars or gone to his. They're like, man, when he moves, when he grabs you, when he does specific techniques, it just feels different than anything they've ever felt before. So
hopefully one day, who knows? Well, Gary, let's wrap this up for today. Henry, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all the great stories and amazing experiences of your life. If you are ever in Chicago area, we talked about this before we start recording, please let us know. I would love to have you for a seminar at my academy. And then, maybe I'll have the opportunity to visit you, and I would love to train with you as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Vegas. I don't have a school right now. I probably will not open up a school. When I left LA, I sold my school, but I do privates at my place in Vegas. So
Cool. Well, next time you're in Illinois, then beat us up here. Just come down here and and show us that little hidden stuff. I just watched you do an instructional on just on a cross collar choke, and it's like, man, I wish everybody could see this because it's important and all those fine little details. Really great stuff. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, Henry. Take care for now, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to ROL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.